Alright, no more putting it off. This is Snarist and welcome back to the channel. This is my review for Resident Evil 9. And before I probably get into it, I just want to address some things. First of all, given the nature of my job and how tiring it can be, and how busy I've been recently, and also the fact that I'm living in a full house, meaning there's a lot of noise often going on. It's currently the middle of the night, and it's about the only time I have to do this sort of thing, when everyone's asleep and everything's quiet. Otherwise, yeah. So, pretty much going forward, I just need to be a little more careful when I choose my times, but at the same time, my editing is probably going to be quite minimal until I can find some way to make it more of a long-term solution to do better. Otherwise, yeah. So, my whole thoughts on Resident Evil as a series is that the series is consistently very good. It has some shitter games, sure, but all in all, I think the franchise is quite good. And while I've only played a few games in the franchise, being that I've played the original back from like the PS1, but not for that long, just enough to get a good idea of it. I've also only played Code Veronica, and not all the way through, but a decent way through. But the only Resident Evil game that I've played of any decent length is when I completed the Resident Evil 4 remake and the original after that. And while I preferred the original over the remake a little bit more, despite its problems, overall I just don't think Resident Evil is really my kind of franchise. And that still kind of applies to this game. I do want to try a few more of the other games going forward in the future, whether it's this year or some other time, but I think I'm just someone who prefers more action over horror, and that's why, even though I've played 7 and 8 as well, I have played those, I didn't really like them. I just felt the first person made them feel way too clunky and way too awkward, which is why going into Resident Evil 9, I started a little bit later than everybody else. So I was aware that you could change the camera from first to third person for grace, and that's what I ended up doing, only playing in first person for a short time just so I can get a proper idea about how the game seems to function, but I ended up sticking with third person for both characters. So I suppose getting into this overall, the beginning of the game has a bit of criticism for how long it takes you, because in the beginning it's a bit of a lengthy cutscene, and then you've got a walking section with Grace where you're just walking down the street and you occasionally bump into people, but there's no challenge to it, there's no purpose. It could have just been a long cutscene. And then she meets up with this cop before she goes into the crime scene alone, by the way, and it's a burnt down hotel where her mother was murdered, which is a flashback that we have after we investigate a bit further. And while I don't think the opening sequence is as bad as what people are saying in terms of how long it takes to get through, because it didn't take me very long to get through, but it just kind of sets a precedent for how slow Grace's sequences can be. And obviously I'm not that big of a fan of it, from what you can tell, but I mean, that wasn't what killed replayability for me, because I think this game has a decent amount of replayability. It's just bothering to do it that really gets to me. And so, what I mean by that is that the game has a decent amount of replayability, of course. You've got 4 different difficulty levels. You've got casual difficulty, which is easy. You've got standard, modern, and standard classic, which is modern is just the regular normal game. Then you've got classic, where I noticed the enemies are slightly more difficult and they do a lot more damage, and you have to use ink ribbons to save all your games and all that. And then you've got insanity difficulty, where every enemy is ridiculously boosted in terms of their aggression. They've got a lot more health, they do a shit ton more damage. And I don't think the ammo drop rates are messed with all that much. I think they are. I did read some patch notes not too long ago about Insanity, because I tried Insanity for a little bit in the beginning of the game, but I only got as far as the earlier sections of the care centre for Grace, which is practically the beginning of the game still, and I just couldn't be bothered. So my experience, my through line with the game is more or less, I started by playing on standard modern, just because I didn't like the idea of having to go back and forth all through the care centre, and trying to solve the puzzles and try to work things out, while at the same time trying to carefully manage my saves, and the idea that when you die you lose all the progress that you made without saving, and I just hate shit like that. So I just wanted to start with modern, so I got an idea about how to play the game, and then I went and I revisited the game on classic, and I found classic to be incredibly annoying. I'm not sure if this is because it was my second playthrough that the enemies seem to do more damage, but I've seen people play classic for their first playthrough, and the enemies didn't do nearly the amount of damage they did in my playthrough, and I don't know why that is. And so my third time through the game was me attempting an insanity run, and I got to the beginning parts of Grace's section in the care centre, and I just couldn't be bothered. I just going back and forth throughout the entire care centre, knowing what I have to do, but never having the will to do it. And see, I don't mind putting up with the game for a long period of time. I just don't like going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If the core gameplay loop isn't very fun, then I'm not willing to do it. And for Grace, I just didn't really like playing as her. On my first time through the game, I actually appreciated the care centre, and I thought it was a really great survival horror experience. But on repeat, knowing what happens and knowing where everything is, even then, and knowing how to solve these puzzles, there's just something about it that just felt, it kind of lifted the veil a little bit, where it shows just how tedious and how sort of scripted everything is, where there is no proper way to kind of cheese and cheat your way through the game to make it those sort of sections a lot faster to conquer. Instead, it's still very by the numbers. And as far as other replayability goes, there is no professional mode. That's basically what Insanity is, but I would argue that Insanity is very unbalanced, because it all stems from New Game Plus, where when you start up a new game, for Leon, he's got that chest where you can buy all the weapons, and you can buy like the odd pip of ammo or health. I do think it's weird how you can only buy one pack of shells or one pack of bullets like per major section whenever you got the box. I think that's really strange, but who am I to argue? At the same time, I noticed that on a repeat playthrough, you don't pick up the weapons that Leon can find normally, like the shotgun or the Uzi. Instead, you have to buy them all with credits or whatever point system they use. You have to buy them from the beginning of the game, and I noticed that because on my second time through the game, when you fight one of the chunks as Leon in the care centre, when you're following through where Grace used to be when you were playing as her in the care centre, I couldn't find the shotgun the second time around, and I was running around looking for it while this thing was chasing me, and I was just using only a pistol, and I was running out of ammo, and then I ran out of ammo, and then I had to use my hatchet. And that's when I realised, after going through the game a little bit more, that, I need to spend these points in order to buy the other weapons, even the ones that you find in the story normally. I thought that was just super stupid. And then I also realised that there's a difference between the credits you earn in the game to buy weapons and ammo versus the credits that you can earn and buy different modifiers in the secrets menu. Because I really wanted to try and unlock unlimited ammo so I can go through on Insanity or try to do that speedrun challenge. And I knew it would take a lot longer because it costs like 50,000 challenge points, and the only things that give you enough challenge points to get to there is, even if you don't beat Insanity and get the 40,000 challenge points, you've got to do other things like beating the game without using green herbs or medical injectors. If I did that on casual difficulty, the game wouldn't be very difficult at all, because I tried a bit of casual, and yeah, the game was significantly easier. The other thing is, the Speed Demon Challenge run, where you've got to beat the game in less than 4 hours. Because I knew what all the puzzles were and how to solve them all, if I played on casual and gave it my best shot and I had unlimited ammo, then I could definitely do it, and do it with quite a bit of time to spare. I've noticed that even some of the most vanilla of people that are YouTubers or streamers that I've seen play this game, I know that they can do it as well. It's not that hard of a challenge. You just got to know what all the puzzles are and where to go. And with unlimited ammo, you could breeze through it, no problem. Just equip Requiem and go through and just blast everything, no problem. So, yeah, the game does have quite a bit of replayability. I wish Professional was a difficulty they put into the game and it was a lot more balanced. Instead of Insanity, because Insanity is just ridiculous. It's not even fun at all. How you can die very, very quickly, but everything takes forever to kill, and Grace's sections just become that much more insufferable. Because I also notice that when you play as Grace, in first person, she's very slow. She takes forever to turn. It just looks and feels so awkward. I prefer seeing her character in third person, just seeing everything. But the other downside I noticed is that if you play in third person, the game just randomly makes her stumble when she runs. Like when she's being chased by one of the stalker enemies, like the girl or Chunk, or the butcher. She tends to, when you're sprinting away and she's running a bit faster, she tends to trip and fall, like one of those like old-timey horror movies where she just falls over and she's stumbling around. And on my channel I actually had like a 1 minute video where it was my attempt to make sort of like a meme video of when I was playing on Insanity and running away from the girl in the beginning of the game, and Grace just kept stumbling, even to the point where I was just turning a corner and I was just running down the hall, and then she randomly stumbles off to the right and it looks like she smashes her head into the side of a pillar, and she does so for like a solid 3 or 4 seconds while this thing is running faster than me, catching up to her. And I was doing all these meme edits, like when she smacks her head into like a wall, or the way that she runs, where she's like flailing her arms to the side and like leaning forward and just kind of like, she looks like she's about to fall over. I just did like a Jack Sparrow edit, a Jack Sparrow run. Like, to me, to stop me from getting angry at Grace from doing all those retarded movements and just having her stumble everywhere, I just pretend like she's Jack Sparrow and just move on. That it just makes it way easier for me to digest, or that she's an actual retard. And yeah, it's part of the reason why I just hate playing as Grace. And I'll get more into that in a moment, because as far as the whole care centre goes, when you're playing as her, I actually, on my first time through, really enjoyed the care centre. You're moving on through it, and you really felt like you were outmatched. And then when you started getting into the groove of things and you started finding more resources, and yeah, sure enough, you don't have to fight every enemy you encounter. I personally think, even though I don't have much experience with Resident Evil, that stealth isn't really something that should be in Resident Evil. Although I do know from playing the original and Code Veronica way back when, that it was definitely a skill you needed to be able to use tank controls to run around the enemy and skirt around the zombies and ignore them. And sure, that would be a problem when you came back, but at the same time, you would save your ammo. And I realised, being a youngster and playing through those games, that you didn't, unlike every other game I played, you don't have to fight every enemy, and in some cases it's best just to avoid them and leave them be. Because they were slow, but they were dangerous. But because they were slow, you could avoid them, and you could just focus on solving the puzzles and finding everything you need and managing your inventory. Because that's kind of part of the appeal. You're going back and forth trying to solve puzzles, but you also have to manage your resources very carefully. And it's another problem in this game, like it is for all the others. I didn't really have a problem with Leon's sections when it came to inventory management, but with Grace's sections, even when I found all the inventory upgrades to increase the amount of space she has, I just found I was carrying around way too much stuff, and I had to leave some stuff behind. But at the same time, if you need to pick up an essential item, but you don't have the room, and you've got to get rid of some items you have in your inventory, what I noticed is that you couldn't drop inventory that you already had on the ground and come back to pick it up later. You had to discard and scrap it, and I have no idea why. Like, I really have no idea why. And you mean to tell me that in an entire hospital, there's not like some sort of duffel bag you can pick up and put stuff inside of it and leave it lying around somewhere, and then you can pick up the duffel bag later and carry it on your shoulder or something and then bring it back to the chest? You mean to tell me that in this entire game there's this one chest that's just lying around the whole time that magically has all the items that you have that you've stored into it everywhere you go, no matter where you go. But somehow it's unrealistic for Grace to carry more than what she's allowed to. Because I just find that ridiculous. Like, you mean to believe me that she can carry around 3 medical injectors into one slot, but one tiny little bag of metal scrap is just too much for her? I don't believe that at all. I mean, with Leon's section, it actually makes a lot of sense because some items are bigger than other items, and so they take up more slots on his inventory screen. But with Grace, everything either gets, numbered and taken up one slot, or just you can only have one of an item and take up one slot. Why can I only hold one bag of scrap, but I can hold 3 injectors? Like, how does that make any sense? Or how does a lockpick take up, or even 3 lockpicks? How do 3 lockpicks take up an entire slot when they were all together about the size of one medical injector, but I can put 3 medical injectors into one slot? See, how does this make any sense? Like, it's bad enough having to go back and forth trying to manage all the inventory, but having to actively discard and destroy items that you've built up over the course of the game, and that you destroy them because you don't want to do a run back all the way through the game where you might run into a surprise enemy that kills you and you've lost all your progress until the last point you saved, if you're playing on Classic, or Insanity for that matter, because on Insanity you have to save with ink ribbons. Excuse me. So, besides all that, the care centre is still really good. I remember my first experience with the game being sneaking past the butcher, going into a hallway, and there's a zombie that switches the lights on and off. I think it's pretty clever that the zombies are still acting and doing things reminiscent of their old lives, so still a part of them that's in there. But I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the zombies talking as much as they did kind of put me off a little bit. I think it was a little bit over the top. They could have just done everything they were doing so that it was not spelled plainly what was going on with them when it came to the virus. But I remember sneaking past a bunch of enemies and all I had was a makeshift knife, and then I wandered into an area where I was trying to sneak past a zombie in a dark hallway and he was distracted by the light, but there was just, I could just see the setup for it. There was a chair blocking off one part of the hallway and a zombie in the middle. I could just lightly sneak past down the middle, but then as soon as I was crawling up behind him, even though literally no other noise and no other room eluded him, suddenly he knew where I was, and then he turned around, grabbed me and bit me, and so I had to keep running because I had no gun and no ammo. And then I had to run into a whole new room where there's like 2 or 3 of them, and then I had to run past them all, and then go into a new room where there was one of them waiting for me, and I had to kite around them, pick up some bullets, load my gun, and then I had to clear out of the room to sort of de-aggro them, and then I had to start working from there, where to go. I kind of like that approach, because at the same time, where I would have liked to just fight them as I go, sometimes you do have to run to begin with, to pick up the ammo and then fight your way through. And the whole objective of the care centre is to go around picking up 3 different quartz blocks, and you've got to fit them into the door in order to escape out the back door, I would assume. So the care centre itself is really well designed. I like the look of it, and I like the layout and everything. It was annoying doing all the backtracking for the different puzzle pieces, and some of it just felt a little unnecessary as well. Such as, there are several locked doors, but why couldn't we just use our gun to shoot the lock off the door and then bust our way through? Sure, it would make a lot of noise, but when you realise you can fight zombies in one area of the care centre, but almost every other area in the care centre is unalerted by these disturbances, and the other zombies can't get drawn to them and they don't come and find you, it just makes me wonder why not, But I do think it's pretty cool how as Leon we can go back through the care centre and we can pick up whatever was left behind by Grace, unless there's things like lockpicking that we could only do as Grace, and whatever can be found in there. The whole care centre is pretty fun your first time around, although the second time around I found it to be really tedious and annoying. Grace has all sorts of pretty cool mechanics, like the blood collector where you can collect infected blood and then you can turn it into weapons. I don't know how this crafting even really works, but you can use it as the base along with a couple of other things like scrap in order to create other things like new injectors, health injectors, hemolytic injectors, ammunition, I don't know how any of that works, but it's far from the most offensive thing in the game, so I'm not too worried about that. Um, Whenever I found some little secret or a new type of ammo for the Requiem or just new things to craft in general, I think it was pretty clever. And I know there's some other secrets in the game I could never find or I'd have to look up to look around for about how to find, but for the most part, I was pretty satisfied with the section on my first time through. Uh, I felt it all started to fall apart when it came to the final part of the care centre for me, when it came to Grace, where you find a level 3 security bracelet, where you can access the holding cell of this little girl named Emily. And Emily is a blind girl that is supposedly a clone of Grace, or, we don't find that until later, but she's one of several experiments, and she had a sister that mutated and turned into the girl, the giant stalker lady that kind of stalks you around the care centre in the beginning, and then eventually in the last part of the care centre where you go into the underground areas. And speaking of which, when you can finally free Emily, you can take her to one of these machines that you have to open up in order to find one of the quartz blocks. And you only have to pick from three different symbols, which are sun, stars, and moon. But there's 4 different slots in which these go. So there's all sorts of combinations you can do in order to get the right outcome. And technically, for the other 2 of these machines, you can guess pretty randomly what they are, but there are definitely clues in the nearby environment how to find them and how to unlock them. And it's not hard to find them at all, so that is the easier and quicker option. But when it comes to the final one, there is no solution anywhere. Instead, the solution actually is written out, but it's written in Braille. The sort of thing that only blind people can read by running their fingers over it and reading what they say. So Grace's logic is that she needs to get Emily to read Braille because she's blind. So she'll carry her through the hospital section, back through an area where zombies just freshly spawned, by the way. And there's also the problem with, they're called blister heads, and these are zombies that if you leave them dead and you come back later on throughout the care centre, they'll mutate and their heads would swell up and get all pussy and red and huge. And they're just regular zombies, but they're way more aggressive. They do a lot more damage, and they can even one-shot you if you're not careful, even on standard modern difficulty. And I don't like these things at all. I don't know if it's just me. Everyone else seems to be able to kill them as Grace, but there was one section down in the underground prison area where I was fighting a blisterhead as Grace, and I shit you not, I wasted like 50 or 60 bullets just shooting it almost constantly in the head, and it just wouldn't die no matter what I did. And so I had to restart that area just so I could go back and try again, but this time shoot it a few times, push it over and run past it. But I still think it's ridiculous, even if it takes more shots, that it takes that many shots and it's still not dead. I think that's stupid. But anyway, speaking of stupid, she wants to take Emily out of her holding cell and into the dangerous areas of the hospital just so she can get to her to the machine so she can read the Braille, when, in all honesty, Grace could have quite easily guessed what the combination was by just testing different things. Because even though it is in Braille and you don't see the symbols, you don't need to know the symbols, you just need to try the different combinations. It'll take a little while, but you can keep Emily safe and you can solve the problem yourself. So that way, if Grace had done this, then she could have found all the quartz blocks, put them in the door, unlock the door, and, well, I could joke all I want about her leaving Emily behind. I still am more than willing to believe that Grace could have actually taken Emily from out of her holding cell once the puzzle was solved, and as soon as you get out into the middle of the care centre, you are safe because no zombies go into that middle area, into the lobby. And even if you want to argue that the girl could show up, like, where's she going to show up from? The ceiling is so high up, you'd be able to see her coming for a long time away, and she can't exactly bust through the wall, but even if she did, well, you've still got plenty of time to get away. You just need to go up the stairs, push your way through the door, and you're all good. You're all set. and then you're on the outside, and while the girl could probably still follow you through, you get to the whole section where you got to go find the helicopter keys, and the helicopter crashes anyway, so you'd be forced to just sort of run outside the care center and get away from it as soon as you can. But would the girl be even willing to leave the care center all that much? Because you end up in another underground area anyway, and that's where you have your sort of boss fight with the girl, and you've got to turn on all the lights so that you can get her to be burnt up, and then you can open up the hatch where it's daytime and it burns her, and then you finish her off by shooting her. All I'm saying is, Emily didn't need to get kidnapped, because she gets kidnapped when you go to take her to read the machine, and the girl busts through the wall as soon as you solve the problem. She takes the girl away, and you've got to go into an underground prison area where they're keeping all the test subjects, and you've got to do what is, to me, by far the most annoying puzzle in the game, where you've got to take all three of these different sort of power nodes, and you've got to put one or two of them into different consoles to power up different areas. It's a cool idea and concept, but going back and forth constantly is just annoying as fuck. And especially when you get to that section where you've got all those different bodies hanging upside down, you've got a few of them that are out of the body bags, and some of them come to life and they grab you. It's just annoying because you've got to push on through them, and you can get stuck on them really easily. Maybe in first person it isn't that bad, but playing in third person it was quite bad. I don't know, that whole section down there is just really fucking stupid. But having known how to solve that puzzle and that problem, it's not so bad anymore. But I think part of it was because there are these pipes you can crawl into once the turbines deactivate. And, well, it should seem pretty obvious that you can do that. I moved up to them and it didn't work. I crouched down and moved up to them, it didn't work. But you have to actually physically crouch down, and you have to move in and interact with it by pushing A, I think, even though it has no prompt for it. It's just not very intuitive. So yeah, that whole underground section sucks, but you save Emily, you bring her back up, and you take her out, and when you get to the outside of the care centre, there's this random black guy who runs and pilots the chopper for Gideon. By the way, Victor Gideon is the villain who kidnaps Grace and brings her here. He's like a former T-virus researcher. He's down in his underground lab beneath his office, and you go down there and you retrieve the keys, but then Victor activates a self-destruct sequence, and you've got to fight your way out, and you've got to get to the chopper area, and zombies are pouring out of the facility, and yeah, eventually he gets killed when he's trying to fly the chopper away, and then you crash land. So yeah, unfortunately he didn't last very long, and then you take back over as Leon to cover her by doing a sniper sequence, and then you fight one of those blister heads that have fully mutated, where they've got all these spores over their body you've got to blow up and destroy. It's quite funny just how much of this game feels like The Last of Us. That game did untold damage to the whole gaming industry, and how many other games where it doesn't fit. They try to fit in stealth mechanics like shivs and shanks, stealth killing, sneaking around enemies that are blind, and they work similar to clickers, even though that's been in other games before. It works almost one-to-one for clickers now. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, long story short, my first time through the care centre was really fun. I had a lot of fun, but on repeat playthroughs it just feels really, really dull and boring and grating. So I suppose before I move on to talk about Leon, and then eventually get back to Grace, I'll just sort of give my overall thoughts of what I think of Grace as a character. I think Grace is okay. All in all, I think Grace looks pretty cute, and she definitely isn't unattractive, but there's just something about her costume that feels really very safe attractive. If you notice that a lot of the other Resident Evil protagonists, whether it's in the past or in the remakes, they're very good looking. And while I could definitely tell that Capcom have been pretty woke for a little while, and it's funny considering how they used to design characters, they definitely have been a lot safer over the years, and Grace just feels very safe. And you could argue that Grace is meant to be a non-sort of sexual character, but I would argue to the detriment of that, Grace at the very least should have been given something more, I don't know, maybe you could cut the top up a little bit. I've definitely seen a couple of crop top mods and everything, especially for some other videos where people have talked about this. Maybe you could give her a bit more cleavage. Maybe you could make her ass stick out a bit more. And I know it sounds really fucked up what I'm saying and all that, but it's true. I mean, you're on the other side of this. Capcom went out of their way to, I think they went out to consult women about how to make Leon more attractive as an older man, because he's like 49 or 50 or whatever. And yeah, Leon looks really good. He is great. And I kind of dig, I'm not gay, but I kind of dig the sort of like older Leon vibes. I really like him a lot. I think he looks super good. And he doesn't need to be naked and all that in order to look cool and look attractive. Because to me, a man, no matter what he's wearing, as long as he's strong and stoic, it's more about the personality and his deeds that make him attractive, not necessarily his looks. But that being said, it hasn't stopped tons of women from thirsting over him like crazy, even more than people would thirst over most girls in games, especially since they added nude mods and everything. And like, even I'm just thinking that's kind of cringe. Like, I don't oppose any of it. If you want to do that to Leon, that's fine. But the same should be okay for every other character, male or female. To me, I'm equal opportunity. If you want to do it, you do it. You bought the game, you have the freedom to do what you want. But that being said, the fact that Capcom went out of their way to do everything they could to make Leon attractive to appeal to their woman audience, the fact that they didn't do the same for Grace to appeal to their male audience, definitely is, well, it's quite telling. And I've gotten to the point now where I don't care what people accuse me of. I know what I want, and I wanted Grace to look more attractive, because there's nothing else about her that I really like. Because I think her gameplay sucks. I think she's extremely aggravating to move around as. She's very slow. She's very tanky to move. Like, there's tank controls, and then there's this, where she turns super slow, even on high sensitivity. She stumbles around everywhere whenever she's panicking. And on my first time through, I did watch cutscenes, so there was that. But then on every other time through the game, I skipped the cutscenes so I can get through the game a lot faster. But in the cutscenes in particular, well, I like Grace as a character when it comes to her, she's very sweet and she's very caring, and I like that about her. However, there's two things I noticed. First of all, she stutters heaps during the cutscenes, and I know that's because she has trauma and PTSD and all that from her time at the Renwood Hotel where her mother was murdered, and so she stutters and she's very sort of mousy and she's like stuttering heaps. But even though that is a reasonable and realistic explanation for why she stutters and everything, I think it's extremely annoying. Like, you could say, like, well, yeah, but she has trauma, so it's more realistic that she does this. It's like, yeah, but it's still annoying. Sure, you might tolerate it, you might be able to put up with it because all of her other traits, shine brighter than that in particular, but it's still extremely annoying. She stutters and staggers more than I do in my speeches. And it just, like, I get the stutter, but there's different ways you can handle that stutter. It could be her hesitating to say something and then she eventually says something, like a tick almost, or you just have her stutter on the odd time, or struggle to find her words sometimes. But instead, in literally every piece of dialogue, no, not literally, but almost every piece of dialogue throughout the entire game, it's like, she's like, what do you mean? It's like, just shut the fuck up already. Like, is there a mod to make her silent in the cutscenes? Fucking hell. So, yeah, overall, my opinion of Grace is that I'm not really a big fan of her. I think she's fine, I think she's cute looking, sure, she's pretty average, but she's very safe attractive, and in a video game, I don't want a chick that looks good to be safe attractive. I want her to be, like, actual attractive. If she's not supposed to be attractive, then make her ugly as fuck and make it a good point. If we're supposed to hate that she's ugly, make it a good point, but she's not ugly. I think she looks good. I just think her character design is very boring and bland. And I don't like listening to her in the cutscenes. I think her personality is just kind of weak. She's not very strong overall in terms of her place in the story, and just... No, obviously, when it comes to her importance to the story, obviously she is, but when it comes to her presence in the game, I just don't really feel it. So I'm pretty torn on Grace, whether I like her like a lot or not at all, but I just wish her gameplay was a little bit better, a little bit more tightly put together. And I do wish that as time went on, she didn't stammer or stutter as much. Like, this is her way of getting over what happens. But she still does it. And that's what really just grinds my gears. Now, seeing as how I've already talked about the whole thing about Leon, about the whole controversy with women gooning to him and all that and going crazy, I suppose I could just move on from that because you've heard it a million times. Overall, I like Leon a lot. Just like I did in RE4 in the RE4 remake, I like Leon a lot. You know, he's got a smart ass attitude. He's very witty. He does wisecracks. I don't think they land quite as well as they do in previous games, especially in the original RE4. But it's still pretty cool. He's still got some good lines. And I did enjoy playing as Leon more than Grace. However, he still feels very stiff, meaning his turning is a little bit slow. His movement's very slow as well. And when it comes to his other mechanics and all that, when enemies are carrying weapons, drop them. You can pick them up and use them. You only use the chainsaw once in the entire game, which I think is silly. But when you face enemies in Raccoon City in particular, they'll manifest weapons by digging into the ground and pulling out like entire like rebar with chunks of concrete on them, and they have the strength to somehow throw them like far enough to hit Leon. I think it's ridiculous, but even if I put that aside, something I noticed is that they put an awful lot of stake in the parry mechanic for the hatchet, because you've got a hatchet that you can swing into zombies and hit them with, but you can also use it to parry all attacks, basically all attacks. Now, considering how wide the zombies can reach for you when you're trying to run around them, it's almost like you have to stand your ground and fight. And that's fine, but when they're up close and you've got to use your hatchet, sometimes because the camera gets so close and you can't pull the camera back, so I'm playing on PC by the way, you can't pull the camera back, or at least I didn't see an option to do that. And so, when it happens, the zombies sometimes get right up in your face and you can't quite see them while you're trying to aim and shoot them. And you might be thinking, well, why would you try to aim and shoot them when they're right in your face? Wouldn't you use the hatchet? Well, that's the thing. Because they're right in your face, it's tough to tell what the parrying time for the hatchet is. And even then, if you just hit them normally with the hatchet, I feel like a lot of these zombies have super armor. Like they just tank all your bullet shots unless you hit them in the head like 3 times. Which, I don't know what it is about modern games that make artificial difficulty by making sure that every bullet you shoot at a zombie just gets tanked. Like even in the original Dead Space franchise, when you shoot a zombie, when you shoot a necromorph, even if you don't hit like a limb or an important body part, a vital body part, if you hit them in the chest with like a plasma cutter shot, you can still stagger and push them back a little bit. It still does something. It does. They don't just tank it and move on like it's nothing, and it doesn't make it more scary or more hectic. It just makes it more annoying. And there are weapons they drop, and whether it's one that you pick up and swing once and that's it, or it's one that you pick up and throw like a spear or an axe, the fact that you can't pick it up and carry it with you and throw it manually is just ridiculous. But that hatchet, not only can they super armor through it, but it does so little damage that parrying is literally the only excuse for it. And speaking of the parry, you can parry later in the game, particularly near the end, when you're fighting Victor Gideon as the final boss. You can parry his giant tentacle attacks, and it takes almost nothing off the durability of your hatchet before you've got to sharpen it. But when it comes to those enemies that wield like a chainsaw, if you can parry the chainsaw, it completely takes away all durability from your axe. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. How does a chainsaw, like I can understand a chainsaw getting rid of all durability for the hatchet, but how does a giant tentacle that can literally crush you with one strike, how does that not take away more than just a fraction of your durability? Just so many confusing things about the game. So when it comes to Leon's gameplay, I do prefer it, although I wish it was a lot tighter controlled. I wish it was a little bit faster. And something I also noticed that was quite infuriating, and speaking of, super armor, when I'm shooting zombies and they're getting close and they're literally stumbling forward and about to grab me, and I'm shooting, let's say, a shotgun or something, well, not really a shotgun, but just a pistol in general, I'm shooting them in the face over and over again, and it's doing nothing to them, and they're still stumbling forward, and they're going to grab me. I go to pull out my hatchet to parry, but I notice that there's a slight delay on the parry. When you're using the pistol, it's not quite as noticeable, but when you use a shotgun and you shoot once, you have to wait like a full second or so before you can pull up the hatchet to parry. Or when you're shooting the hunting rifle, you've got to wait 2 seconds while Leon shoots and pulls back the bolt, and then you can parry. And it just looks so awkward and weird. So it's like, you basically need to wait for them to come at you before you can parry them, instead of defending yourself with a gun. Whereas with a gun, if you use a gun like a shotgun or a hunting rifle, and you need to quickly pull out your hatchet to parry, and you can't do that because you've got to wait for your animation locked. You've got to wait for it to finish before you can put up the hatchet. And it's just really silly. So that's more or less how I feel about Leon's gameplay. I prefer it over Grace's. I like it a lot, but I wish it was a lot better, controlled tighter. And so the core gameplay is pretty good. The loop isn't so good because unfortunately his sections aren't very good, because you only get to play as Leon for like 5 minutes at a time, a few different times throughout the beginning of the game, and then you get to the halfway point in the game and you play as Leon for basically 90% of that. But for the most part, you're just stuck in a section of Raccoon City. And I'm not going to lie, I really like the environment of Raccoon City just because of how it looks and how desolate and destroyed everything looks. I don't mind that it's pretty linear, this game, and that a lot of the puzzles are pretty easy to solve, because as someone who's getting older and can't be fucked, like trying to figure out all these really stupid puzzles, to me, I prefer the skill of the game, learning how to solve a game in terms of its gameplay, how to overcome certain dangers and obstacles and challenges. So to me, puzzles that are overly complicated and confusing just sort of slow the game down. So while I did like the exploration in Raccoon City sections, I just found it to be pretty annoying that you had to do it to find a detonator part to blow open a gate. And like, it was still fun, but I just wish it didn't drag on for as long as it did. And then we get a motorcycle chase, which the only problem I have with the motorcycle chase is that I wish you were more in control of the bike, where you could actually crash it more often, or that there were more death scenes that you could experience by, failing to make a jump or failing to get enough speed. I wish you could like drive and shoot at the same time, but no, you can't crash it all, unless of course you don't defend yourself well enough and the enemies end up killing you. But it is pretty funny from what I remember of Resident Evil 6 is that people gave Resident Evil 6 a lot of shit, but all the big, like, massive Resident Evil 6 moments in this game, even some pretty close ties to the movies, I found people were pretty silent about all that stuff. Just very funny to observe, I think. I haven't played Resident Evil 6 myself, but given how it's the most action oriented in the franchise, and I've seen a bunch of gameplay of it in the past before in several years, um, I am thinking about giving it a play just for the fun of it, because a lot of those older Resident Evil games are very cheap now. So I think it'd be pretty funny just to get into some of the more action orientated ones. And speaking of which, um, once the section in Raccoon City is over, you've got a little bit more to go. We end up back at the RPD, and I haven't been with the Resident Evil franchise long enough to know whether or not giving Leon PTSD is a good idea. But I just think it's a little bit on the odd side when you have the entire franchise who's been cracking jokes and just being very whimsical, where he's one of those characters where it's like he should have PTSD but he doesn't. He moves from being like a rookie cop to a secret agent type of deal, and then going off and solving all sorts of biological terror threats, especially when it involves Umbrella or these other different corporations and these different infections and plagues and diseases and viruses and stuff like that. And he just seems very whimsical and wisecracks, and he's a traditional action hero, so seeing him get PTSD is a little bit strange, but I also know it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe he starts to really feel like a rookie cop again back when he was an RPD. The idea that since the very beginning he only ever wanted to help people and just to be like an everyman, but then as time went on, he became like not an everyman, he just became like the man. And there's still a part of him that wishes that Raccoon City never got destroyed and he was just a cop, just in that city, protecting the people he cares about. So I definitely think that's some pretty nice like storytelling there, but I know him getting PTSD has been a bit of a criticism here and there, so I can understand that. I just don't completely agree with it. And not only that, but you have to fight Mr. X again, but now he's got like a tyrant version of it, I think, or at least I think that's what it's called. And that's when the parrying with the hatchet gets pretty ridiculous, because you can parry his attacks and stop him from hurting you. And I think it's pretty ridiculous overall. But, something I noticed as well is that the bosses seem pretty easy in this game. It's just simply like move from side to side, get out of the way, parry with the hatchet. But some bosses and some enemies you can't even parry with the hatchet, which I find really strange. It's just something to throw out there, but when it comes to going into the arc itself, which is like an umbrella base, again, I haven't played too much of all the other RE games, so I don't know if the arc looking like all the umbrella bases from the Resident Evil movies is intentional, but I still like the look of it. It's just that you don't spend a lot of time in there, and I don't have many thoughts on that whole like section of the game itself, apart from one particular section, which is the boss fight with Hunk. Now, even though I'm not big on the Resident Evil franchise, I have slightly paid attention to the lore here and there about, what Resident Evil is about. And Hunk occasionally came up, and despite knowing very little about him and very little has been written about him, I think Hunk overall became my favourite Resident Evil character just by virtue of him being a regular human being with tons of training. And the thing is, unlike with Leon, who is a human, Hunk doesn't have any special kind of plot armor. He just is that dude. He's a regular soldier who trained exponentially and built himself up to be an incredible, a super soldier without any sort of serum or upgrades or boosters or anything. He's just a really strong soldier, tough dude. He's got tons of weapons, tons of body armor, got that helmet on, and he goes through and cleans up all of Umbrella's threats and cleans up after them and deals to them. And despite being a very plain character, it's how he's presented that makes him amazing. So I was very disappointed not only to see him without his helmet in Resident Evil 9, out of all the things to see in this game and the member berries and how much this game depends on nostalgia, which has been pretty funny. Capcom's recent games have been all about nostalgia instead of standing on their own 2 feet, which I think is pretty funny. But I think the Hunk boss fight was extremely easy and disappointing. I felt like he should have given us more of a challenge, or he could have been a stalker enemy throughout the game, hunting Leon down every once in a while, just popping out and trying to kill him, and then Hunk has to retreat after you beat him back. Now, I don't think Hunk is really dead, but if he is dead, I'm glad Leon was the one to do it, because there's only 2 characters in Resident Evil I think could probably match Hunk and beat him legitimately, like one-on-one. And those 2 characters are Leon and Chris. I think they're the only 2 characters that can actually beat Hunk. I'm willing to believe that he's alive because there is that whole thing of, you can check back in the room after leaving it and his body's gone. And yeah, you can notice throughout the whole game, all of the zombies you kill and all the enemies you kill, their bodies still lie around throughout the entire game. But Hunk's is the only one that disappears. And I think that's really funny. Now, I don't know how he could have survived a giant axe to the side of the neck. Now, people have speculated that because he's super old now, like 60 or 70 years old, he's boosting with the virus, or using some sort of virus to be able to give himself more of an edge, and so it helps him recover a lot faster. So he managed to recover just in time to escape. And by releasing Elpis at the end of the game, he eventually gets over his T-virus infection that's slowly killing him as well. So he survives, and so he's allowed to keep on fighting. And then at that point he depends on tech or boosters or something to keep him going in his old age. And whatever the next game might be, he might come back as another character returning, but this time maybe Chris gets the final kill on him. Either way, Hunk's a cool character, and I think they definitely character assassinated him here. Even if it was to serve a purpose in the future, I still think having him die so easily and go out like a bitch, even to Leon, is just a whole new level of disrespect. And one of the few things I was really excited for in this game when I saw it. And I know a lot of people, it's pretty funny actually, I'm not a big Resident Evil fan, and despite so many other people, streamers and YouTubers being big Resident Evil fans, a lot of them had no idea who Hunk was when he showed up, and I think that's just really funny. So overall, let's talk about the endings. Now there's 2 endings you can pick, and the bad ending, which is the Destroy Elpis ending, is what you pick if you weren't really paying attention to the story. Now I was, so I thought it was pretty clever, at least, that my patience for putting up with, Grace's stupidity and her stuttering and all that, all the notes you find, it was definitely a good reward. Now, if you destroy Elpis, then Grace will escape from the Ark and she'll go back up to the surface. But it's a bad alternative ending where Leon and... actually, no, I forgot to bring that up. Besides Victor Gideon, there's one other villain in the game that basically has no presence whatsoever. It's a clone of Albert Wesker named Zeno, and because he means nothing, even though Albert Wesker is a big deal, if anyone had to be a boss fight, I think Zeno absolutely had to have been a boss fight, but they just don't make him one. You don't get to fight him. And I think that's really disappointing, because it could have been their way of doing an Albert Wesker boss fight, but no, it's just not what happened. So yeah, with Elpis destroyed, the antiviral disappears, and so Leon eventually succumbs to his illness as Zeno beats him down, and then he shoots him in the face. And then you can load the game back up and try again. whereas you can save Elpis and you release an antiviral which helps basically cure all of the T-virus infections around the world, or eventually you get it out there. And that's cool to see and everything, but something I had to think pretty carefully about is the reason why it exists in the first place. So supposedly Grace was adopted by Oswald Spencer and given to Alyssa Ashcroft, adopted by her and taken care of her. And I did a little bit more research into who Oswald Spencer is, and apparently he's like the founder of Umbrella, and he helped create like the foundations of the T-virus and how everything came to be. And his whole shtick is that he's that classic like Japanese like villain archetype of, I want to be a god and everyone else beneath me, has to die in order to achieve that. But in some of the video recordings you can see of Oswald Spencer, he actually shows regret for what he's done and creates Elpis as an antiviral to cure everything he's ever done. Now, I think that's extremely stupid. Characters are no longer evil for the sake of being evil anymore in media in current modern times. I just think that's really stupid. But some people have chalked it up to him being him being egotistical, as in like if I can't be a god, then nobody can be a god. And so he destroys everything he's created so that they can't use the T-virus in order to gain more power, but also can't achieve their own goals and their own means. I think that's pretty funny if that's the case, but somehow I don't believe that. I don't think they're smart enough to write that in there, because all in all, the story has so many holes you can poke in it, and it's just not that good of a story. It's told poorly, and it's just not a good story overall. Filled with retcons, filled with all sorts of, fucked logic, and just, I don't know. It gets tiring trying to wrap your head around how much of it just doesn't work. And that's more or less the endings of the game. Just a quick little thing as well. People have pointed out that in the artwork and when you look really closely at the end of the game, when Leon takes off his glove and his T-virus infection is gone, you can actually see he's got a wedding ring on, meaning he's married. And a lot of people have been going crazy speculating over who that is. I'm willing to believe that it might be Ada, but at the same time, Ada Wong is very much like the type that's married to her job. And, I'd hate to see what she's become when she's gotten to her late 40s and 50s and all that, and just seeing how kind of decrepit she's gotten, because Capcom would do that. So people have also made the connection that I think Sherry, who's now all grown up and is working as sort of like a, the voice in Leon's head, the voice in his ear, guiding him to the next objective and helping him figure things out. And she's sort of giving him some back and forth during the game as well. And I know Sherry was a little girl in RE2, and so it could be seen as a little bit strange that once she's a little bit more growing up and, Leon's super old now. So I don't know about the ages of the characters, but I would assume now that Sherry would be probably in her late 20s, possibly early 30s. And Leon himself is, getting close to his 50s, maybe he is 50. But I definitely understand people being weirded out by the age gap there. Personally, I'm not that offended by the age gap. Like, I think as long as they're legal and there's consent, then, why the hell not, I mean, a lot of men are biologically wired to want to desire chicks that, let's just say chicks that still have all their eggs together, chicks that are like from 18 to 30, they're still desirable. Whereas the older they get, they become a little less desirable. It's just an inherent thing when it comes to our biology. And so if it turns out that Leon is not in fact married to Ada and is married to Sherry instead, leaving the older Roasty behind in favour of the younger Sherry, which, Sherry looks very gorgeous in this game, by the way, then that's pretty based of Leon, I can't lie. And I can't hate it. So, yeah, with a very bizarre end to that, and everything I've talked about at the beginning of the video when it comes to replayability and the different difficulties and what you can expect from it. So my overall impression of the game compared to the ones I played, again, as a reminder, I've played the original on the PS1 for a decent amount of time, but I still remember some of it, but not heaps. I've also played Code Veronica on the PS2. I have played the RE4 remake, and then I played the original, and I'm pretty sure that's all I've really played, apart from Resident Evil 9. So, as far as where it all fits in there, I think I prefer Resident Evil 4 remake and the original over Resident Evil 9. Like the original, I enjoyed a lot, but it plays a lot to Dead Space, and Dead Space is more my thing. So there's that. The remake definitely was fun. I just felt a little bit sluggish, which is pretty funny because I'm pretty sure this was the latest Resident Evil game before Resident Evil 9 came out. And yeah, so I got my problems with it. But Resident Evil 9 was still pretty fun for what it was. Um, I might sound like I've been complaining the whole time, but I legitimately have enjoyed the game. All in all, I don't know what to think of the other games. I don't know if I'll play all of them, but I definitely got a few marked down that I want to give a shot this year. If not, maybe next year. So I know a lot of people really love this game and they've been enjoying it a lot, but I just find it really strange how, even like more than me, a lot of the sales numbers are made up of people that have never played Resident Evil before, because this one had insane amounts of marketing and it just, it was advertised as the next big game, so a lot of people were, made their way into playing it. And if they've never played a Resident Evil game or a game like this before, I can understand why this being a lot more accessible, or this being a lot more player friendly, definitely appealed to them, especially since it's a one-time experience. Your first time through the game is pretty fun, but then every other time after that just starts to feel grating and tedious, and only the most dedicated and hardcore players are going to be playing through everything and doing everything. Because I think you can play the game any amount of times that you want, it doesn't really change much, but actually trying to beat Insanity, or trying to beat Speed Demon, or trying to go through without using any health items, I definitely think that's the real test right there, and it'll be quite telling in the future to look back on the achievement list and see how many people have actually bothered to do it. So, obviously I don't really like to follow the masses. I'm not much of a contrarian myself, I just say what my opinion is, but I do often find that when so many people hype up something as like the best thing since sliced bread, and it's amazing and this and that, I find myself quietly resenting whatever that product is when I experience it for myself and I find out it's nothing like what people were saying, or it's extremely disappointing. And it's like, how can people be critical of what the game industry has turned into and what typically gets released, but then they look at this and they see no problems whatsoever and give it all the accolades and all the good scores. So I think this is the first game this year that's being sucked off way too much, and I don't think it's really that good of a game, but it's not a bad game either by any means. And had I made this review earlier, it would have been my favourite game this year. But seeing as how I've made the choice to, look at the price tags for a lot of these games and realise that most of them aren't even worth it on release, I'm still going to buy them and play them. But I'm also going to include older games I've never played before that were cheap on sale on Steam that I've been playing, and it would have been my favourite game this year so far. But one other game now has surpassed that, and I think it'd be quite surprising to find out what it is by the end of the year. Especially if you've been following my channel, you might have heard some things here and there, or you've been reading my posts, you'll know that there's one game in particular I've been playing not too long ago that was quite fun. And all in all, Resident Evil 9 is still pretty fun in spite of its problems. I just wish it was done better. And when it comes to the future, the game's sold well enough that they're going to release DLC for the game. They're already working on it. I don't know if it'll be free. It should be, given the price tag and everything, but if it isn't, that would definitely change its position on my favourite games of the year so far, if it wasn't free. But if it is free, some things I think they could do is they could add in like a hunk storyline that happens after he gets bodied by Leon, showing him trying to escape from Ark, or just seeing him fight his way through zombies leading up to the confrontation with Leon or something. Just something to do with Hunk. Or you could do it from a completely new character somewhere else, or what another character was doing throughout the course of the game, showing that some other character was manipulating events here and there, and just changing up the mechanics and making it unique and different to play. You could do something like that. I mean, I still think, now that I think about it, that the game is taking a more traditional experience or like taking heavy inspiration from The Last of Us Part 2, which is probably a bad thing, swapping between characters. I would have preferred if they did like an A and B storyline, where you can choose to either play as Grace throughout the game, or you can play as Leon throughout the course of the game, since the gameplay is roughly about the same in terms of its time you spend on it. I think you spend a little bit more time with Grace than you do as Leon, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, so I would have liked an A and B storyline instead, so you can at least choose what you play. So I still would have played both, but it would have been better on repeat playthroughs to only play as Leon and then to go back and play Grace's section whenever I feel like it. Because I really wanted to go back and play as Leon, but the fact that I couldn't chapter select, or I can't pick different storylines, I had to play the game from the very beginning, it just got irritating fast. Now, I am hoping for a mercenaries mode as well. Maybe that's the DLC they're talking about. But yeah, let us play as the main characters, let us play as like Hunk or whatever, or maybe add in some of the other characters like Wesker or Ada or something. Hell, you could even make us play as like Zeno or Gideon or something. I think if you tightened up the gameplay and you put Mercenaries mode into Resident Evil 9 and made the environment super cool, then I think it could be a really fun mode and you can get back into the game and playing it more often, and that would probably put a bit higher up on the score, especially if it's free. But as it stands, as this game on its own, it's not worth the money at full price. At least I don't think it is. If you've replayed the game like 3 or 4 times, or even 5 times, it definitely is worth the money. But if you're only playing it again twice, at most, it's still not worth the money, especially with the quality you get. If you have a problem with a lot of what I've been saying and, the story sounds pretty off-putting or just sounds kind of dull, then yeah, I'd argue wait for a sale. Because as far as Resident Evil goes, in terms of these games go, I'd say this is probably quite mid, especially when it compares to the others, even though I haven't played most of them. I can tell those ones were probably a lot more widely beloved because of the gameplay, but then when I hear people talk about Resident Evil 9, it's mostly about the characters and story, even though, admittedly, none of those things have been very particularly strong in this game. So, all in all, I'd say Resident Evil 9 Requiem is a 6. It's a decent game, it definitely has a lot of good things going for it, but if the controls were a lot tighter, it'd probably be a 7. If Grace's sections weren't so mind-numbingly boring, and they toned down the walking sequences, and they cut out that stupid like orphanage section where you're playing a flashback as Chloe and how slow it was when it could have just been a cutscene, then the game probably would have been closer to an 8. But if the New Game Plus and the way it works where you have to buy all your guns again, apart from the pistol, and Insanity wasn't so mind-numbingly stupid with how it's balanced and designed, then the game could have easily been an 8. And it could not only have been one of the better games of the year, but overall it might have actually been my favourite game of the year. So even with the addition of a Mercenaries mode and some more DLC, I still don't think this game at its core is going to be one of my favourites of the year. It could still very well be, but if it is, it'll be on the lower side. So all in all, if you're a huge Resident Evil fan, you're going to be playing this game heaps. Definitely worth the money. If not worth the money, wait for a sale. If you're not really a Resident Evil fan, I think you could probably have a lot of fun with this game, but maybe just wait for a sale later on in the year.